Most people spend their lives chasing trends that fade while ignoring the timeless patterns that quietly build generational wealth. If you understand the mechanics of what never goes away, you stop playing the short game and start building forever. If you want to build wealth that lasts, you have to root it in things that last. That means directing your energy, capital, and thinking toward industries that serve enduring human needs, not short-lived desires or temporary fads. This is a principle that becomes more obvious the more experience you gain. Most people, especially early in their careers, chase what's new or exciting. They get pulled into the momentum of trends because it feels like progress. But when you step back and analyze how wealth is actually created and sustained over time, you'll see a consistent pattern. The most reliable sources of long-term value come from businesses that solve fundamental, recurring problems. Human beings don't stop eating, sleeping, getting sick, aging, learning, living in homes, or dying. These are constants. They're embedded in our biology and the structure of society. And because of that, any economic activity that services these constants has a built-in baseline of demand. That doesn't mean every business in those spaces is guaranteed to succeed. Execution, efficiency, and adaptability still matter, but it does mean the underlying need won't go away. That kind of demand resilience gives you a structural advantage that's hard to overstate. Think about the difference between operating in a space with constant demand versus speculative demand. In the first case, your risk exposure is largely tied to how well you serve the need. In the second, your risk is tied to whether the need even continues to exist. That's a massive difference. One is about operational competence. The other is about existential fragility. If you're in a business that can be rendered obsolete by a shift in fashion, sentiment, or technology, then you're always vulnerable. You're building on sand. But if you're tied to something permanent like food, shelter, or health, you have a foundation. Your job becomes improving on delivery, not reinventing the wheel every few years. Another important aspect is that these needs tend to scale with population and complexity. As the world grows, the demand for food, healthcare, energy, and education increases, not linearly, but often exponentially. That provides an expanding opportunity base, which is exactly what you want if you're thinking in terms of compounding over time. It also means these industries have room for innovation, not to replace the need, but to meet it more efficiently or broadly. That's where competitive edge and long-term value creation meet. Most people underestimate how much easier it is to grow a business when you're not constantly fighting against declining relevance. They end up mistaking activity for progress. They work harder just to stay afloat because the underlying market they're in is deteriorating. But the truth is, when you anchor yourself to real, timeless demand, you can focus your effort on depth, quality, and improvement rather than chasing relevance. That's a smarter use of energy, and over time, that shows up in the numbers. Understanding this isn't about avoiding risk, it's about choosing your risks wisely. When you align with reality, when you base your financial decisions on things that persist, you position yourself to benefit from time itself. That's how real wealth gets built. Once you begin aligning with timeless demand, the next logical step is learning to distinguish between structural forces and cyclical ones. This difference matters because most financial decisions, both personal and business, are made without this distinction in mind. People tend to overreact to what's happening now without understanding whether it's a short-term fluctuation or a long-term shift. When you don't separate the cyclical from the structural, you end up making poor decisions. Buying when things feel good, selling when they feel bad. Hiring in booms, cutting in downturns, chasing sectors at their peak, and abandoning them when they correct. Structural forces are the long-term drivers. They shape the foundation of economies and industries over decades. These include things like demographics, technological progress, inflationary regimes, geopolitical shifts, and the basic needs of populations. You can think of them as the deep currents beneath the surface of the water. They move slowly, but they're powerful. You can't change them, but you can learn to navigate with them. Cyclical forces, on the other hand, are fluctuations that occur around those long-term trends. These are recessions and recoveries, bull markets and bear markets, booms and busts. They're driven by sentiment, credit cycles, inventory corrections, policy responses, and other short to medium-term variables. These are more like the waves on the surface, sometimes large, sometimes small, but temporary in nature. If you're building wealth or a business, mistaking a cyclical upturn for a structural trend can be one of the most expensive errors you'll ever make. It's the reason so many people enter markets too late. They see momentum and confuse it with inevitability. They misread timing as trajectory. The inverse is also true. People often abandon good long-term opportunities just because they're in a temporary downturn. That's because they haven't built the mental habit of distinguishing between noise and signal. A useful way to internalize this is by constantly asking yourself, is this change temporary or permanent? And then what's driving it? If you can't trace the effect back to a fundamental cause that's durable, you're probably dealing with something cyclical. That doesn't mean you ignore it, but you treat it differently. You don't redesign your business or investment strategy around short-term movements. You adjust for them while staying committed to your long-term positioning. Understanding this principle also protects you from emotional overreaction. Markets, headlines, even internal feedback loops in businesses are filled with volatility. If you react to every change as if it's structural, you create instability in your own system. But if you have clarity on what's cyclical, you can use those moments strategically. Buy when others are fearful, hire when talent is abundant, expand when capital is cheap, and so on. This clarity of thought, knowing what's fundamental versus what's passing, is a core skill. It takes discipline, and it often requires standing apart from crowd behavior. But once you develop it, you stop getting thrown around by every wave and you start navigating according to the deeper currents. That's how you maintain direction in a noisy, fast-moving world. Once you're grounded in long-term structural forces and understand how to differentiate them from cyclical fluctuations, the next step is deciding how to act within that framework. This is where principles, not emotions, must drive your decision-making. In practice, this means having a clearly defined set of criteria that you return to regardless of whether the environment feels favorable or uncertain. People who succeed over time aren't guided by impulse or excitement. They're guided by logic, tested systems, and a commitment to reality. There's a tendency, especially in volatile markets or uncertain moments, to abandon principles in favor of instincts. But instincts are shaped by short-term experience and often respond to fear or excitement. They're useful for survival in urgent situations, but not reliable for building something that endures. Principles, on the other hand, are grounded in cause and effect understanding. They help you respond with clarity instead of reaction. When people chase hype, they're often responding to social signals rather than fundamental signals. They see other people making money and they assume the opportunity must be real and sustainable. But without understanding the underlying mechanics, what drives the demand, what sustains the margins, what protects against disruption, they're just speculating. That speculation may work for a time, but it's not strategy. Over the long term, markets reward consistent behavior rooted in value creation, not momentum chasing. Clear principles act like a filtering system. They help you evaluate whether something is worth your time, capital, or energy. If a business opportunity doesn't align with timeless needs, isn't supported by long-term structural forces, or doesn't offer a competitive edge that you understand, then you pass. It's not about missing out. It's about not getting pulled off course. Discipline is not about being conservative for its own sake. It's about being rational in an environment that often rewards emotional decisions in the short term. Being principle-driven also allows you to learn in a structured way. Every decision becomes a data point, not just a win or loss. You can step back and evaluate what happened, what worked, what didn't, and why. This is how compounding knowledge happens, not through experience alone, but through reflection guided by a framework. Over time, this makes you more effective and less reactive. Another benefit of principle-based thinking is that it builds trust, both with yourself and others. People, whether they're investors, partners, employees, or customers, are more likely to work with you when they sense you're consistent, thoughtful, and not driven by impulse. Your decisions aren't unpredictable because they follow a logic that creates stability in relationships, which compounds over time, just like capital does. In environments where noise is high and clarity is rare, the ability to act based on principle is a strategic advantage. It keeps you focused, protects you from common errors, and allows you to capitalize on opportunities others misread. When your actions consistently reflect your understanding of reality and not your hopes, fears, or the crowd's behavior, you gain leverage that most people never develop. This isn't theory, it's just the practical outcome of disciplined thinking. Once you're making decisions based on principles instead of emotion, the next step is to consider how your choices behave under stress. In a world defined by uncertainty, resilience is not enough. You need systems, businesses, strategies, processes that benefit from disorder, not just survive it. This is where the concept of anti-fragility becomes essential. It's not just a preference, it's a requirement for long-term success. Most people operate under the assumption that stability is the norm and that volatility is a deviation from that norm. But the truth is that volatility, randomness, and surprise are permanent features of the environment. Economies fluctuate, markets correct, technologies shift, and black swan events occur. If your success depends on everything going according to plan, then you're not positioned for reality. You're positioned for a version of the world that doesn't exist. In practical terms, a fragile business is one that relies on perfect conditions, steady revenue, uninterrupted supply chains, predictable customer behavior. As soon as any variable breaks, the whole system weakens or collapses. Resilient businesses can absorb shocks. They bend but don't break. But the most effective systems are those that actually gain from stress. They learn, adapt, and reposition more effectively with each disruption. To build that kind of system, you need to design it with stress in mind. That means having buffers, extra liquidity, diversified supply lines, margin of safety in pricing, flexibility in staffing. But it also means embracing feedback. When something breaks or underperforms, that's not just a problem, it's a signal. If you're paying attention, you adjust and improve. Every disruption becomes a form of education. Over time, your system doesn't just persist, it evolves. You also need to avoid over-optimization. Many people aim for maximum efficiency because it looks good in the short term, higher margins, faster cycles, tighter controls. But highly optimized systems tend to be fragile. They leave no room for error. They're brittle under pressure. A principle worth keeping in mind is that what looks like short-term inefficiency, redundancy, caution, optionality is often long-term strength. It's not wasted capacity, it's risk protection. This also applies to how you handle people and partnerships. If your organization only works when morale is high and outcomes are predictable, it will struggle when adversity hits. But if the team can disagree constructively, solve problems under pressure, and learn from mistakes without blame, that system is anti-fragile. It will get better with testing, and testing is guaranteed by the environment, whether you prepare for it or not. The way you respond to disorder says more about your system than any performance metric during stable times. Anyone can look successful in a rising market or an expanding economy. The real test is who holds or improves their position when the context changes. That doesn't happen by accident. It's the result of intentional design, of structuring your strategy to benefit from stress, not fear it. When you're guided by principle, prepared for volatility, and structured to gain from it, your upside isn't just preserved, it expands with time and pressure. So when you step back and look at the full picture, building around timeless needs, separating the cyclical from the structural, making decisions rooted in principle, and designing systems that gain from stress, you begin to see that long-term wealth isn't about luck, timing, or hype. It's about alignment with reality. It's about seeing the world as it is, not as you wish it to be, and positioning yourself accordingly. Most people are reacting to noise. A few are aligned with truth. If you can be one of the few, disciplined, clear thinking, and grounded in principles, you won't just build wealth that lasts. You'll build a life that works in any environment.